My name's Doyle, and some of the time I go by Dr. Schrader, but when you and I meet, I want you to call me Doyle. I want you to remember that. Your first 72 hours on campus are going to be physically and mentally exhausting because there's just so much to remember. You'll feel jealous of the seniors because they know where everything is, how everything works, and what everybody wants to be called. But when you feel that way, you should take comfort from the fact that they have very good reason to be jealous of you, because before too long, they're going to have to walk off campus and face one of the biggest challenges of their lives. They're going to have to look for a job, but on average, they've done that 2 or 3 times already. But this time, it's to start a career. They're going to have to build a case that they should be given more responsibility and promoted, and the behaviors, habits, and skills that predict whether that's going to go smoothly. If they don't have them by the time they're seniors, it's probably too late. Those take root where you are right now, which means if you are thoughtful and strategic and you don't take any shortcuts with the transition from high school to college, this is going to become your secret weapon and set you up for success, not just fresh out of college, but for your entire career right up until the day you retire. Now, if I try to talk about everything that goes into transitioning from high school to college, you'll still be watching this video when it's time for your grandkids to sign up for classes. So I'm just going to focus on 4 things. First, call your instructor by the right title. Second, don't be the cause of preventable distraction when class is in session. Third, understand that I am not a licensed teacher. Fourth, there are rewards in store if you can move from being a technical adult in the direction of being a real adult. And after I've talked about those 4 things, then I'm going to have a big finish. First thing, call your instructor by the right title. You've already heard me say that you should call me Doyle, and that's a departure from what it was like in high school where you pretty much called people Mr. or Ms., and a few you called Coach. But the day you turn 18, you're not a child anymore, and so I'm not the only professor who's going to invite you to call me by my first name. Now, I have some students who recognize that you are more than 32 years younger than I am, and you might not feel entirely comfortable calling me by my first name, and that's okay if you want to use a title. The title needs to be Dr. Schrader. I do have a PhD. I don't think I'm egotistical about it, but I worked on it for 10 years, and when you call me Mr. Schrader, you demote me. Now, some people hear that and they think, okay, problem solved. I'll just call everybody doctor. But some of your instructors don't have their PhD. They're either still working on it or simply never pursued it. And if you call them doctor, there may be an uncomfortable moment where they correct you. And then I even have a few colleagues who prefer to go by their last name. I can't stand that. Every once in a while, a student will yell from halfway across campus, "Hey, Schrader!" And I think, we're not in the military together. We're not on the football team together. Don't do that. But do you see the problem? There are 4 different options I've described, and each one is someone's favorite and someone else really hates it. So there are 2 things you do to cope with this. The first thing is, the first time the class meets, the instructor will tell you what they want to be called. And if they forget, just raise your hand and ask them. And you may feel a little flicker of apprehension. What if that's a dumb question? You're going to feel that little flicker of apprehension over and over when you're a first year. A question will come up in your mind, and before you raise your hand, you'll think, but wait, what if this is a dumb question? Here may be the best advice I give you in this entire video. Ask it anyway. Push right through that fear. Ask the question anyway. It will pay off richly. The other thing you do about what title to use with your instructors, I don't know why this is. There's probably an organizational communication study in here somewhere, but the title professor works for everybody. If you can't remember what people want to be called, just call them professor and their last name. You could call me Professor Schrader. It's not anybody's favorite that I know of, but nobody hates it. So keep that in mind if you forget what you're supposed to call someone. That's the first thing. The second thing, do not be the source of preventable distraction when class is in session. I have 2 examples of this. Example number 1 is having a side conversation with the person sitting next to you. Now, I get it. I was in kindergarten and 1st grade and 2nd grade and 10th grade and 11th grade, and teachers pretty much kind of nag you ineffectually all day long. No talking, stop talking. But it's a little bit like being on the highway a couple miles over the speed limit when there's no highway patrol in sight. As long as you don't get caught, who's being hurt? In college, it's different. If I see you having a side conversation with someone sitting next to you, one time I will look you in the eye and tell you to stop. If it happens more than once, I'll simply throw you out of class. The other example I can give you of being the source of a distraction which is preventable is to play on your phone or to have your laptop there to take notes, but have a second window open where you're shopping on Amazon or streaming the basketball game or something like that. Now, I have had students appropriately get a little assertive with me and say, I'm paying tuition for this, and if the professor is off on some tangent, or if they're explaining something that I already learned in high school, and I'm using my device to stave off boredom, that's my business, and it's my right. And I would almost agree with you, but there was a study done. It was published in 2012 by a team of researchers from York University and McMaster University in Toronto, Faria Sana, Tina Weston, and Nicholas Cepeda. And what they did is they got participants in a room, and the participants were given a lecture, and some of the participants took notes on their laptop. And in the control group, the only thing they had open was the window to take notes on, but in the experimental group, they had that window open and a second window open with something like Instagram, something that they would multitask with. And the first result of that study is not going to surprise you. The group that had multiple windows open and they were multitasking, when they were tested over the content in the lecture, their scores were lower. But the real eye-opening finding was that the scores of everybody who had a direct sightline to the laptop, their scores were also lower. People who couldn't see the laptops did better. People who were trying to take notes and were not using a laptop and were not multitasking themselves, if out of the corner of their eye they could see someone else multitasking, their own score was lower. So I want you to think about that. You may not only be distracting yourself, you're distracting other people. And they may be struggling, and they may be the first in their family to go to college, and you need to have a little bit of thought not only for your own learning environment, but for the learning environment for other people that you're creating. Now, the reason that this is different from high school is what I'm going to talk about in the third thing I want to tell you, which is that I am not a licensed teacher. If you went to public school, you've always been taught by licensed teachers. If you went to private school, I'm willing to bet that a lot of your teachers majored in education or got a master's in education with a licensure track. Possibly not all of them, but a lot of them. Anybody who went that route is a specialist, spent years of their lives taking college level and even graduate level classes in how teaching happens and how learning happens. So what they did is they designed lessons, and then they watched you very, very carefully to see signs that you might be struggling, and if you did struggle, they knew different ways to offer help that was tailored to the kind of struggle you were having. I've never had an education class in my life. And it's not just me. The same could be said for our math professor and our biology professor and our psychology professor, and it's not just NCU. The same could be said for the professors at the University of Oregon or Lewis and Clark or anywhere else you might have considered going. We are not educators, we're content experts. I've never had an education class in my life. I've had a zillion classes about communication, which is my field. What's going on here is from kindergarten through 12th grade, you were given experts in learning to make sure that the learning process was going smoothly for you. Now that you've turned 18 and you're no longer a child, you are expected to be the expert in your own learning, which means you can ask me questions and I will answer them and I will give examples to illustrate my answer, but I'm not watching you to make sure that you're keeping up. That's something that you've got to do. So you might think of it the way when you were a child and you went to the pediatrician and your parents would decide together what was going to happen. If they decided you needed a shot, you were getting the shot. As an adult, when you go to the doctor is going to explain to you what your symptoms mean, going to give you a diagnosis, and talk with you about options, but then you will make the decision. Once you're no longer a child, you are expected to be in charge of your own well-being, and that's what happens in the classroom as well, and that's why your professors are not educators any longer. I can give you one example. This is from a student I had about 5 years ago, and miraculously, he actually graduated this past May, so apparently he got something turned around. But he was in my class when he was a first year, and he paid me a visit, and I guess about week 11 of our 15-week semester, and he said, "Coach said I have to come see how I'm doing in your class." So I popped open my grades, and I showed him most of the assignments he had zeros on. The few he had turned in, he had a fairly low F, and I said, mathematically, no matter what you do, you can't pass this class. And he didn't look too worried. He paused for about a second and said, "So what's the extra credit?" What had always happened to him before, all the way through high school, was him passing was a foregone conclusion. It was the teacher's job, The teacher had to be creative, and the teacher had to set something up, design something to where he had a path to pass the class. And so he assumed the same was true in college. And when I told him there isn't any, he wound up coming back and taking that same class a second time and didn't pass it that time either. But he did eventually graduate, so it has a happy ending. He figured a few things out. The fourth thing that I want to talk with you a little bit about is that there are rewards out there for you if you can strain in the direction of moving from being a technical adult to being a real adult. Now, in the eyes of the law, the day you turn 18, you are an adult, and you can serve on a jury, and you can sign up for the military, and you can vote, you can sign a contract and it's legally binding, and if you commit a crime, they're not sending you to juvenile court. So by all those measures, you are already an adult. But in the field of sociology, they have a different definition of adulthood, and it's got 5 prongs. Think about these. The first prong of you being genuinely an adult is you are done with your education. Now, if that described you, I doubt you'd be watching this video. The second one is that you are completely financially independent. And we get a few students here who are, but most are getting a fair amount of help from their parents, grandparents, or other family members. The third is you have moved so completely out of your parents' house that they're not keeping your bedroom anymore, and if you come to pay a visit, they have to make up a guest room for you. The fourth is you are ready to get married, and the fifth is you are ready to have children. And you might be thinking, all those things at 18? The field of sociology is a little bit out of whack. Well, the laws that define 18 as the age for adulthood are between 100 and 150 years old. They were adopted by states in the last couple of decades of the 1800s and the first couple of decades of the 1900s. And back then, most 18-year-olds could pass all 5 of those tests. My parents, fresh out of high school, got married. My father immediately got a 40-hour-a-week job that paid enough that he was able to buy a house, and my mother was able to stay at home and be a full-time housewife. But that is not the world of 2020. A lot has changed. There is a researcher in the field of psychology named Jeffrey Arnett, and he makes what I think is a compelling argument that there is a developmental stage that we really haven't paid enough attention to. It's sort of blown up in front of us as the world has changed, and we haven't really acknowledged it yet. We know all about newborns and toddlers and teenagers and adults, but he says there's a stage at the end of adolescence before full adulthood, and he calls it emerging adulthood. There's data from several decades back from interviews and instruments given to people who were ages 18 to 21, gauging their confidence in their own identity and in their ability to make wise decisions about major life events like where should I live, what kind of job should I have. And Arnett has re-administered those interview questions and those instruments to people today, and he says the same level of confidence in their identity and their major choices that people used to have between 18 and 21, today they reach that level of confidence between about 25 and 29. And what that means is you are here, and in the eyes of the law, you're an adult. But as far as where you are in your thinking and where you are in your choices, very, very likely you're in the same boat with a lot of people, that you are lining a lot of things up that you're going to need later, but you're not quite ready to master all of it just yet. Now, I don't know if you remember when you were back in first grade, how your teacher, kindergarten probably too, your teacher used to play the quiet game with you. And if you're still watching this video and your attention hasn't drifted, I gotta say, you're probably killing it at the quiet game. What your teacher was doing back then was pointing you in the direction of the 18-year-old you would one day be. Because now, sitting still and giving someone your attention is not that difficult. You grew into it. When you were 5 or 6 years old, it was very difficult. If you've ever been around a room full of 5 and 6-year-olds, they're a squirmy little bunch, and their attention kind of goes everywhere. But it was the ones who would succeed at the quiet game who got to line up first to go out to recess, who got to line up first to go to lunch. And the teacher held out prizes for people who could push a little bit forward developmentally and get to where they were going developmentally ahead of the rest of the class. And I gotta tell you, there are also rewards in store for you if you can push ahead developmentally. Now, I keep using that word. Let me tell you, you've already made it through some developmental stages and developmental milestones. I can give you a couple of examples. I about guarantee you've learned how to walk, and about guarantee that you are potty trained. Both of those are developmental milestones. And the thing about them is, not everybody reaches them on the exact same day of their life. If you were to talk to your parents or your grandparents, especially if you have brothers and sisters, you might find out that when you were close to being ready to walk, that you were pulling up on everything. You had your game face on. Or you might find out that you were kind of the mellow kid, you were cute, and people picked you up and carried you where you wanted to go, and if you pointed to something, someone would hand it to you, and you just kind of were in no hurry to walk. And the same is true for potty training. There are some kids who want those big kid pants, and there are other kids, you know, they're having a good time playing, the potty can wait. The thing about moving forward developmentally is outside pressure can't do it. Your parents could probably confirm that there came a day when they really wanted you to be potty trained. But it wasn't going to happen until you decided it was important to you. That's kind of where you are right now. In that gray area of emerging adulthood, outside pressure is not going to make you a full, real adult, but inside pressure can do it. And you might be thinking, well, why should I? In the same way, the ones who could win at the quiet game were the ones who got to line up first to go out to recess. Do you like the idea of paid internships? Do you like the idea of fellowships that can pay for you to travel? There are all sorts of rewards out there for 18-year-olds who can put on a convincing imitation of the 30-year-old that they will someday be. And you might think, okay, that does sound good. Can you give me some examples of what I need to do? I can give you a couple that you've already heard from me. One of them is, when a question occurs to you and you feel afraid because it might not be a smart question, push through that fear and ask it anyway. The people I know who will hold back from asking questions because they're worried it might be a dumb question are almost all 18. I can't think of a single successful 30-year-old who does that. Another example, side conversations. I am in meetings with a whole lot of people who are over 30, and I never see them turn and whisper and carry on a running conversation with the person next to them. Let me give you two more. One of them is, start thinking about events in your life not in terms of who likes you and who's mad at you, but instead in terms of what are the consequences of my behavior. I can give you a real easy example of this. I have a lot of first years every year who are still figuring out how to wake up in the morning, and periodically they'll sleep through class. And they always come and they apologize to me, giving me this heartfelt apology, and usually they use language like, I don't want you to be mad at me. Well, when my juniors and seniors accidentally miss class, accidentally sleep through class, the first thing they ask me is, was there a quiz? Was there something due? Their mind immediately goes to what damage have they done, and maybe what do they need to do to mitigate that damage. But with the 18-year-olds, it's all, I don't want you to be mad at me. And for your entire childhood, most of the conditions of your life were imposed on you by the grown-ups around you, so it was very important that the grown-ups be happy with you and not mad at you. That is going to become secondary in importance. And I don't mean to say that it's unimportant whether people like you and it's unimportant whether people are mad at you. It's important. It's just not the measure anymore, and you should start letting that sink in. The second thing that is an opportunity for you to lean toward the 30-year-old you will someday be is to stop being amused by procrastination. Stop being amused by it. Now, I'm not saying stop procrastinating completely or you'll be a failure. Not saying that at all. A whole lot of people, I would venture to say almost everyone, struggles with procrastination. But the successful 30-year-olds I know are not amused by it. We recognize that it's a problem. We recognize that it's something we have to guard against. But I know a lot of 18-year-olds, and I fully understand that you do this as a form of stress management. I know a lot of 18-year-olds who will brag almost and definitely laugh about the fact that they started studying for a major test the night before and then put in a marathon all-night cram session, or that they started writing a paper the afternoon that it was due and just slapped something together, and they just find that endlessly amusing. Think of it this way. Imagine you had a friend, maybe your roommate, who got all their money, didn't have a bank account. I don't know why, it's a hypothetical, work with me. They got all their money in cash, and every day their cash just kind of fell out of their pocket, and by 10 days in the month, they had no money left, no way to feed themselves, and they were looking at being out on the street, and this replayed every month. I don't think anybody would find that funny. I think it would be very clear that that was an urgent problem that needed to get solved. Well, think about this for a minute. Money is nice, money is even important, but when you waste money or lose money, you can always go out and make more money. You cannot make up time. You cannot create more time.
And when you are being wasteful with time, that shouldn't be funny. That should be the kind of thing that motivates you to think, okay, what am I going to do about this? What solution can I come up with that's going to work? All right. So the 4 things, if you're going to make it from high school into college and be successful, start off by figuring out how to address people. What does your instructor want to be called? Be aware enough of how you're treating other people that you are not the person who is the cause of avoidable distractions. Be aware of your relationship with your instructors enough that you know that I'm not a licensed teacher. You are expected to be the expert in your own learning. And finally, be aware that there are rewards that are available to you if you will push yourself in the direction of going from being a technical adult to being a real adult. Now it's time for my big finish. And my big finish has 3 parts. What I'm going to do is I am going to be an amateur theologian. And then second, I am going to be a storyteller. And then third, I'm going to flip back to being an academic. Okay, theologian. 2 things to tell you about God, 1 thing to tell you about the devil. The first thing to tell you about God is that all of us have a role that we share in common, and that is that we are all put on earth to glorify God. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all of it to God's glory. And the second thing I can tell you about God is God gives good gifts. This is straight from the mouth of Jesus. Who among you, if your child asks for bread, will give them a stone? Or if they ask for a fish, will give them a snake? So if you, as wicked as you are, know how to give good gifts, how much more will your Father in heaven? But the thing I have to tell you about the devil is his go-to play is to make you doubt that. His go-to play is he wants to take God's good gifts and make you skeptical and cynical. He wants you to believe that you're being cheated. He wants you to believe that the gift is not as good as it appears, and what you should do instead is you should be out for yourself. And you should amass all of the pleasure and all of the wealth and all of the glory to yourself. And one other thing I have to say about that is, if you receive God's gift in the spirit that it's given, you often have to wait a while. You often have to repeatedly meet God and receive the gift as He gives it. But if you do, you'll thrive. And if you instead follow the path that Satan's laid out for you and follow the narrative that he's established for you, then in the beginning there'll be a lot of pleasure and you will very quickly begin to destroy yourself. This is what Satan did with Adam and Eve in the garden. Whole lot of good gifts there. Satan succeeded in making them cynical and thinking that they were being cheated, so they took the fruit for themselves. There was a moment of pleasure, and then sin entered the world. There are a lot of people out there who, well, maybe not a lot, there are people out there who accept the work that God prepares for us. God calls each of us to work that He prepared for us before the foundation of the world. And there are people who see the work they get up every day and they go and do as a mission field, as an opportunity to glorify God, as an opportunity to build something, to work with integrity, and then to give that to God, to return it to Him as a gift of gratitude for all that's been given to them. And then there's the majority of the human race who show up to work every day and say, my workplace is political and it's backstabbing, and my objective is to get promoted as high as I can, to get as many pay raises as I can, and then to spend all that money on possessions and experiences, which I will then photograph and put on Instagram, and those pictures on Instagram will get me likes, and then that will fill this emptiness I feel inside me. Except that it never will. So that is my little bit of amateur theology. I want to go now to be a storyteller and give you a hypothetical example. I want you to imagine, this is not going to be a happy hypothetical, I want you to imagine that NCU and every other college you applied to didn't accept you. And any financial aid you applied for, it all fell through. What I'm setting up for you is, imagine a world in which God slammed the door to college and told you in no uncertain terms, you're not going to college this year. But then also imagine that out of the blue, without you even really looking for it, you got offered a job waiting tables at a very well-run restaurant. Is it possible to glorify God while waiting tables? Now, if we were face to face, I would pause and wait for you to answer this question, and every time I've asked that question, I've gotten the correct answer. Yes, it is. And I then elicit some of the details, and what we come up with is, you glorify God waiting tables by being patient, by being cheerful and kind and compassionate. You do it with integrity. You don't cheat even when nobody would ever catch you, and you do it a little bit counterculturally. You do not necessarily do it the same way the rest of the waitstaff does it. You are supportive of the rest of the waitstaff. You're not haughty. You don't look down on anybody else. You support everybody else, but you do what you know is right. So then my question is, let's imagine a group comes in and they just show absolutely terrible manners. They're nasty to you in every way possible, and they're making jokes to each other. Hey, stay in school or you might wind up waiting tables. Is it okay for you to go in the kitchen and spit in their food? Does that glorify God? And I always get the right answer. No, it doesn't. Well, what if everybody else on the waitstaff is doing it? Then is it okay? No, it's still not okay. What if every Sunday you go to church and you play in the worship band and you teach Sunday school and you teach a small group Bible study in the week and you get all your God stuff right? If you do that, then it's okay if whenever annoying people come into your restaurant, you can go in the kitchen and spit in their food, right? Get the God stuff right, and God turns a blind eye to what you do in the non-God stuff. And I typically get the correct answer, which is there is no non-God stuff. Even then, it's not okay. So that's my hypothetical, and I will be back for it in a minute, but now I want to switch hats one last time and be a professor again. I did not have a word for what I was seeing until about 4 years ago when I stumbled upon the research of a couple of Swedish psychologists by the name of Marton and Sylje. And I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, but the name has 2 umlauts in it. It's the best I can do. What they did, they had participants in their study read a very difficult scientific article from a peer-reviewed journal, and they told the participants, we're going to come back and test you to see how much of it you understand. What they did after the participants were done is they interviewed them in addition to testing them, and they asked them, how did you prepare for the test and how did you feel? The largest group actually, as they read the article, memorized individual words and individual sentences, and they said that they felt afraid. What they were afraid of was that they were going to be accused of not having even read the article at all. So they prepared defensively to try to shield themselves from the label of failure. And Marton and Sylje called that shallow learning. And they said that it predicts a lot of behaviors in learning environments where you tell yourself C's get degrees, you write the paper just before it's due, you cram for the test right before it's due, and never along the way do you think you're actually learning anything. You don't understand much of any of it. You don't think you're going to retain any of it, but getting an F would be bad. It would be a setback. So all you're doing is you're trying to swat F's out of the way and do just enough to get by. There was a second group who, as they read the difficult scientific journal article, they thought creatively, what kinds of questions are they going to ask me? And they doodled those questions down and then looked for the answers to the questions in the article. And when they were tested on the article, their score was very high. And Marton and Sylje called that strategic learning. And you might be thinking that I'm about to say shallow learning is bad, strategic learning is good. But wait. The thing about strategic learning is people who are strategic learners very commonly graduate with a 4.0, very commonly are the valedictorian or the salutatorian, and I've had students like that in my classes. I've had some students take multiple classes with me who have a 4.0 and were their high school valedictorian. And sometimes in those later classes I'll say, do you remember last semester when we talked about uncertainty reduction theory? And they look at me as though I just stepped out of a UFO. No, I don't remember that. That was last semester. I got the A in that class. Why would I still remember it? And they approach school like they're playing a video game. And all they're doing is trying to set a high score and clear levels. Marton and Sylje said that there was a third pattern of behavior they saw from their participants. These were people who really wanted to understand the article, and they doodled down questions that they wish they could ask the researcher. And they turned to each other and they would teach it to one another. And Marton and Sylje called it deep learning. And here is where I want to say to you that God did not call you to wait tables. God called you to 3 square blocks of classrooms and professors. And if you want to glorify God, the way to glorify God is to approach learning with integrity. And to approach your classes as opportunities to master it, to truly understand it, and to retain it, to not play damage control, to not measure your success only by the grade and find the shortcuts that'll get you to the grade, but to approach it as an opportunity to learn. And even if you see that all your classmates do things at the last minute, and even if your friends and your teammates all say C's get degrees, and even if the people who are leading worship in chapel, you are in awe of how mature they seem to be in their discipleship and their walk, but you also see that they cut a lot of corners and take a lot of shortcuts when it comes to their studies. Even then, God called you to a place of learning. The way you glorify God in what He called you to do is you do it with integrity. And now I can hear you thinking, because you're not the first college students I've ever taught, and some of you are thinking, I've tried, and I've tried repeatedly. Semester after semester, I've had good intentions. This is the time I'm going to be a really good student, and every time I fall flat on my face. I can't do it. And here's where I'm supposed to say, yeah, you can. But it's not what I'm going to say. Instead, what I'm going to say is, you're right. You can't do it. But this is a familiar story, and I want to make it even more familiar to you. You try, you promise yourself you're going to do it on your own strength, you're going to make all the decisions, you're going to do everything right, and you fall on your face repeatedly, and there finally comes a moment when you say, I can't. And that's not bad, and that's not failure. That's the most glorious moment of all, because that's when you return to the Father who gives good gifts. And you say, Lord, my heart is to glorify you. But if I approach college and I try to do it on my own good intentions, and I try to do it with my own willpower and my own wisdom, I'm going to make it shallow, or I'm going to make it strategic. And I'm not going to do it in a way that glorifies you. Father, I need you. Pray that. And don't just pray it once. Jesus taught the parable of the widow and the unjust judge to make the point that you pray over and over and over again, and you do not give up. And Jesus told his disciples, I am the vine and you are the branches, and apart from me you can do nothing, so abide in me. And if anyone is watching this video who is the parent or the grandparent or the coach or the youth pastor or the younger sibling of someone who's starting college, this is something you should be in prayer for your family member, for the college student who is on your heart. Pray that they will approach the learning opportunity in college not in their own strength, but with a heart to glorify God and with a willingness to depend on God, to return to God again and again and say, by your Holy Spirit, Lord, enable me to do this with integrity. I know at the beginning of this talk when I said the transition from high school to college, this could be your secret weapon if you're strategic and you're thoughtful and you don't take any shortcuts. I know that wasn't good news. I know your parents, if your parents watched this, they probably smiled and nodded along with it, but I know that for the students, any students who saw this, it just turned the pressure up on you. But the thing is, it's not something that was ever going to work if you tried to do it on your own. And what God calls you to do, He equips you to do. So, my counsel to you would be, start praying now. Say, Father, I can't do this on my own. If I do, I'll make a mess of it. But when I depend on you, when you strengthen me, I can do all things. And keep praying that right up until the day you set foot on our campus, and keep praying it for the whole 4 years that you're here. I look forward to meeting you. And when I do meet you, remember, call me Doyle.